Ethan Ward stood on the cracked steps of the old Hale estate, his boots grinding against the dust that had collected over years of abandonment. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the gnarled oak trees, and the house before him loomed like a monument to decay. Windows were boarded, shingles curled like old parchment, and ivy strangled the sides as though nature had been trying to pull the building back into the earth. To most, this was not a home but a ruin, a relic of better days long gone. To Ethan, however, it was all he had left. The will had been read only a week earlier in a dimly lit office that smelled of tobacco and old paper. The family had gathered in an uneasy circle, and Mr. Donovan, the executor, had adjusted his spectacles before clearing his throat. Everyone had leaned forward, eager for their piece of the inheritance. With Shadow resting patiently at his side, Ethan had not expected anything. He had grown accustomed to disappointment since returning from the war. Marcus Hale had smirked across the room when Donovan announced that the grand estate, Hale Manor, would go to Ethan. The smirk had soon transformed into a full-throated laugh, joined by Clara's derisive chuckle. Marcus called it a pile of rubble, a burden rather than a blessing, and Clara had shaken her head, pitying Ethan as though he had been tricked into accepting poison disguised as a gift. To them, wealth came only in glittering jewelry, fat bank accounts, and properties that shone with modern luxury. An old, collapsing house was a cruel joke in their eyes. But Ethan had said nothing. He had stood silently, his shoulders broad but weary, his hand resting gently on Shadow's fur. His silence was not acceptance of defeat, but a shield. Words had long lost their sharpness in his life. Actions, endurance, and truth meant more. So he signed the papers, thanked Donovan, and left with Shadow trotting loyally at his side. Now standing before the manor, Ethan let out a long breath. The house seemed to exhale with him, releasing the stale air of abandonment. The memories of his uncle drifted back like faint whispers. As a child, Ethan had visited this place only once, and even then, the halls had been dim, filled with locked doors and secrets unspoken. His stern and distant uncle had not been the kind of man to share his heart easily. And yet here Ethan was, the chosen heir of what little remained. Why? The question echoed in him, heavy and unanswered. Shadow barked once, his ears pricking at the sound of a crow taking flight from the roof. Ethan reached down, scratching the dog's neck. Together, they stepped into the foyer. The door creaked like a groan from deep within the house's bones. Dust spiraled in the thin beams of light that broke through gaps in the shutters. The smell of mildew and wood rot stung Ethan's nose, but beneath it lay something metallic and faintly familiar. Like the tang of iron, he moved slowly through the rooms. Broken furniture leaned against the walls, cobwebs draped like funeral cloth, and silence hung thick. The echoes of his boots on the floorboards made the house feel cavernous, larger than it truly was. Shadow stayed close, tail low but steady, eyes darting into the shadows. Ethan found the study first. Bookshelves towered on either side of the room, their shelves sagging beneath the weight of forgotten volumes. Many had fallen, lying open with yellowed pages curled like withered leaves. On the desk sat a rusted oil lamp and a scattering of papers. He sifted through them, but found nothing but receipts, faded ink, and names of dead people. Sitting heavily in the worn leather chair, Ethan rubbed his temples. This house was supposed to be a homecoming, a fresh beginning, yet all he saw was ruin. He could almost hear Marcus's laughter echoing in his ears. Clara's pitying gaze still stung his pride. They thought him a fool. Perhaps they were right, a broken soldier in a broken house. But Shadow growled, low and sharp, pulling Ethan from his thoughts. The dog's eyes were fixed on the corner of the room where a cabinet stood slightly ajar. Ethan rose, his hand instinctively brushing against the old combat knife he still carried at his belt. War had taught him caution. He approached the cabinet, the hinges whining as he pulled it open. Inside lay little of interest: old coats brittle with age, a box of rusted nails, and a single iron key, its handle twisted into ornate patterns, dark with tarnish. Ethan held it up to the fading light. The weight was solid, heavier than any ordinary key. Shadow barked again, wagging his tail this time, urging Ethan to understand. He pocketed the key, a spark of curiosity igniting in his chest. For years he had moved through life as though drifting, carried by duty and survival rather than purpose. But now, in the silence of this decayed mansion, a whisper of purpose stirred. The key was not just an object, but a question, a promise of something hidden. The evening drew close, and the manor grew darker every minute. Ethan lit the old lamp, its flame flickering weakly, casting wavering shadows across the walls. He wandered deeper into the house, guided more by instinct than logic. Each creak of the floorboards was like a pulse, the heart of the house beating beneath his feet. He found himself in a long hallway lined with portraits, stern faces watching him with eyes that seemed alive. His uncle's portrait hung at the end, the gaze sharp and unforgiving even in paint. Ethan paused there, meeting those eyes. Was it a challenge, a warning, or an invitation? Shadow pressed against his leg, breaking the moment. They moved onward, exploring room after room, each filled with relics of the past. Broken clocks, trunks filled with moth-eaten clothes, photographs blurred by time. Yet none bore the same weight as the key in his pocket. When night finally swallowed the estate, Ethan decided to camp in the living room, where the ceiling had not yet caved in. He spread his thin blanket on the floor, leaning against the fireplace where cold ashes lay thick. Shadow curled beside him, warm and steady. The crackling silence pressed in, but Ethan's mind buzzed. The war had taken much from him. His brothers in arms, his health, his sleep. Nights were often haunted by memories of sand and fire, of cries that never ceased even in silence. But tonight, the ghosts of the past mingled with the secrets of the present. He dreamed not of the battlefield but of locked doors, winding staircases, and voices calling from the dark halls of this very house. Morning came pale and gray. Ethan rose stiffly, his breath visible in the cool air. He began searching systematically, determined to understand what his uncle had left him. The kitchen was barren, the pantry empty save for jars of dust. The dining hall echoed with emptiness. But when he descended into the basement, the air shifted. The walls were stone, damp and cold, and the ceiling low. Old tools hung rusted on pegs. Barrels lined the corners, their contents long spoiled. Yet at the far wall, half hidden behind stacks of broken crates, Ethan saw a door of iron, small and locked, its surface scarred by time. His pulse quickened as he reached for the key. It slid into the lock with surprising ease. The click echoed through the cellar like a gunshot. Shadow barked sharply, tail stiff with alertness. Ethan hesitated only a moment before pulling the door open. The darkness beyond was heavy, unbroken until he raised his lamp. The flame revealed a narrow passage descending further underground. The air was thick, stale, and carried the faint scent of earth and secrets buried deep. Ethan tightened his grip on the lamp, his other hand brushing Shadow's head for reassurance. The dog's eyes gleamed in the dim light, fearless and loyal. Together they stepped into the passage, the door creaking shut behind them. Whatever his uncle had hidden here, whatever fate had chosen him to inherit, lay waiting in the silence below. And for the first time since returning from the war, Ethan felt not despair but anticipation. Something was calling him, and he was ready to answer. The memory of that day in Donovan's office still burned in Ethan's mind as he sat alone on the cold stone steps of the cellar, the faint smell of mildew clinging to his clothes. It had been the kind of moment that left scars deeper than any battlefield wound, not because of violence, but because of humiliation. The war had hardened him against gunfire, explosions, and loss. But the sneers of family had a cruelty that pierced differently. He remembered the polished oak table where Donovan spread the parchment, his voice careful and deliberate. The family had gathered as though for a performance, waiting for their names to be called and fortune to fall into their hands. Clara had been dressed immaculately in her silver blouse and pearl earrings, her lips pressed together in a thin smile that tried to mimic sympathy, but could not conceal disdain. Marcus had lounged in his chair, his cufflinks glinting as he tapped his fingers against the armrest, confident he would walk away with everything. When Donovan announced that the estate had been left entirely to Ethan, a silence had first filled the room. It was a silence of disbelief, thick enough to choke. Then came Marcus's laughter, sharp and merciless. He leaned forward, clutching his chest like the idea was a comedy staged for amusement. Of course, it would go to the broken soldier, Marcus had said between gasps of laughter. Of course, it would go to the man who had returned from war with nothing but scars. What better punishment than to leave him a decaying ruin that would drain the last drops of dignity from his veins? Clara had not laughed as loudly, but her words had cut sharper. She had tilted her head, eyes narrowing with mock pity, and murmured that perhaps their uncle had wanted to test Ethan's endurance one last time, to see if he would break under the weight of futility. Ethan had endured. He had sat still, his fists tight but his expression calm. Shadow had pressed against his leg, sensing the rising storm within him. In that room, he had been the target of ridicule, yet he had refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing him falter. Uncomfortable with the mockery, Donovan cleared his throat and reminded the family that the will was final and Ethan was the legal heir. Marcus had scoffed, muttering about lawyers and mistakes, swearing to challenge it. Clara only shook her head, muttering that she wanted no part in such a burden. But Ethan had known then, even before he set foot in the manor, that the inheritance was not what it seemed. His uncle had been a man of silence and secrets. This was no mere gift or curse of an old house. It was a message, a puzzle, a test. Now, in the cold of the cellar with the iron key heavy in his pocket, Ethan thought of their faces again. He could still hear Marcus's jeers, Clara's pitying tone. Their laughter had been meant to break him, to reduce him to nothing. Instead, it had forged a resolve deep inside him. He would not let their voices be the last echo in his life. The following days after, the will was filled with whispers and rumors. Word spread quickly through the family, through neighbors, even into town. Ethan became the subject of stories told in hushed tones. Some said he had tricked his uncle, and that a man like him did not deserve such an inheritance. Others pitied him, shaking their heads at the cruelty of being left with ruins instead of riches. The laughter grew, spreading beyond the family, until it seemed the whole world sneered. But Ethan had long learned that the world would always find ways to laugh at those it did not understand. On the battlefield, the enemy did not care who he was only a target. At home, the enemy was ridicule, and it aimed to strip away dignity rather than life. Still, both required the same response, endurance. 1 week after taking possession of the estate, Marcus appeared at the gates one evening. His sleek and polished car stood in sharp contrast to the crumbling fence. He stepped out with a smirk, his shoes crunching gravel as though he owned the ground he walked upon. Clara followed, though reluctantly, her arms crossed as though shielding herself from the shame of being seen in such a place. Ethan then greeted them with silence. Shadow barked once, his growl low as he stood between his master and the visitors. Marcus spread his arms wide, gesturing at the house. "Look at this monument of failure," he said with mock admiration. "You've truly inherited the crown jewel of ruin." Clara sighed, glancing around at the decayed wood and broken windows. She suggested Ethan sell the land, take what little money he could, and leave before the house collapsed. But Ethan only stared at them, his jaw tight. He knew their words were daggers hidden in velvet. They were not here to offer advice, but to confirm their superiority and see him bend. Marcus, leaning closer, lowered his voice into something more venomous. He whispered that, "You'll never make this place more than what it is. It will swallow you whole, and when it does, I'll collect what's left." Ethan said nothing. Silence was his weapon, and he wielded it with precision. Marcus eventually sneered, turning back toward his car, Clara trailing behind with one last pitying look. Their departure left the estate in silence again, but their words lingered like smoke. That night, Ethan sat by the fireplace, staring into the ashes, Shadow's steady breathing the only sound. He thought of Marcus's threats, Clara's pity, the whispers of the family. They were all waiting for him to fail. They were all waiting for the house to become his tomb. But then his hand brushed the key in his pocket, and his thoughts shifted. The iron was cold but real, solid. It was proof that the manor was a ruin and a riddle. His uncle had chosen him, not Marcus, not Clara. There was a reason. The laughter of his relatives was fuel now, not poison. Every jeer was a spark, every sneer a flame. He would prove them wrong, not with words, but with discovery. Whatever lay hidden within these walls, he would find it, and when he did, the laughter would die in their throats. The next morning, Ethan rose before dawn. He walked through the halls with renewed purpose, Shadow at his side, the lamp's glow guiding them. He moved toward the basement again, to the iron door he had unlocked the night before. The air there was colder, as though the earth held its breath. He descended, step by step, into the darkness. The walls grew narrower, the ceiling lower. The smell of damp earth thickened, mingled with something older, something metallic. His lamp flickered, shadows stretching like fingers across the stone. Shadow stayed close, his ears twitching at every sound. Ethan thought again of Marcus and Clara, of the laughter that had haunted him. He whispered into the silence, not to them but to himself. "Let them laugh," he said, "let them mock. When the truth comes to light, it will silence them forever." The tunnel stretched further than he had imagined, winding deep beneath the house. The key had unlocked more than a door. It had unlocked a path into his uncle's secrets. With each step, Ethan felt himself moving further from the weight of mockery and closer to something greater, something that might redeem the ruin of this house and the ruin inside him. And so, while Marcus and Clara reveled in their laughter, Ethan pressed forward into the shadows, determined to uncover what they would never see until it was too late. Their voices grew fainter in his memory with every step he took, replaced by the steady rhythm of his boots on stone, the loyal breath of Shadow at his side, and the call of secrets waiting in the depths. The iron key weighed heavily in Ethan's pocket as he moved deeper into the bowels of the estate. The cellar passage sloped downward, each step echoing against the damp stone walls, reverberating like whispers of long-dead voices. The air grew colder, thicker, as if carrying secrets buried for generations. Shadow padded at his side, ears pricked, nose twitching at scents only he could decipher. The flame of Ethan's oil lamp wavered, throwing distorted shapes against the stone. He held the key tightly in his free hand, its cold metal biting into his calloused skin. This was no ordinary key, no trinket left to gather dust. Its ornate engravings spoke of purpose, something meant to be unlocked, something concealed deliberately. His uncle had not been a man of sentiment, but he had been cunning, meticulous. If he had left this behind, it was not by accident. At the end of the passage, Ethan came to a heavy wooden door bound with rusted iron bands. The wood was swollen with damp, scarred by age, yet the lock glinted faintly beneath the grime. He raised the key, the lamp flame catching its edges. For a moment, doubt gnawed at him. What if there was nothing behind this door but rot and cobwebs? What if the key was only another cruel joke, another way for his uncle to test endurance beyond the grave? But Marcus's laughter echoed in his mind, sharp and mocking. Clara's pitying eyes returned, cold and unforgiving. No, Ethan thought, this is not nothing. This is mine to uncover. He slid the key into the lock. It resisted at first, groaning against years of rust. But with a firm twist it gave way. The click reverberated like a gunshot through the narrow passage. Shadow growled softly, his muscles taut, waiting. Ethan pushed the door, its hinges screaming as it swung inward. The chamber beyond was small and square, carved directly into the rock. Shelves lined the walls, their wooden planks sagging beneath the weight of books, ledgers, and boxes. Dust blanketed everything, disturbed only by the soft swirl of air entering from the passage. In the center stood a chest, its iron corners corroded, its lid closed but not locked. Ethan stepped inside, the floor uneven beneath his boots. Shadow sniffed the air, moving cautiously around the perimeter, his nose brushing the walls. Ethan set the lamp on a shelf, the flame casting a weak circle of light. He knelt before the chest, his hand hovering over the lid. Memories of the battlefield surged unbidden into his mind. The tension before opening a crate suspected to hold explosives, the hesitation before breaching a door that might conceal an ambush. His breath slowed, his pulse steadying. He pressed his palm against the chest and lifted. The hinges groaned, flakes of rust falling like snow. Inside, bundles of papers lay wrapped in cloth, their edges yellowed. Beneath them, an assortment of objects gleamed faintly in the lamplight. A silver pocket watch, a signet ring, and a small leather-bound journal. Ethan lifted the journal carefully, its cover cracked, its strap brittle with age. He opened it and found his uncle's handwriting, bold and deliberate. The first page bore only a single line, "For the one who endures." Ethan's chest tightened. He turned the pages slowly, scanning words about investments, names, and places. There were ledgers of land purchases, discreet accounts hidden under false identities, records of money lent and debts owed. His uncle had not been a man of idleness. He had been building something, layer by layer, shielded from the eyes of greedy heirs like Marcus. Shadow barked sharply, pulling Ethan's attention. The dog stood before a section of wall where the stones appeared uneven. Ethan approached, running his fingers across the rough surface. One stone jutted slightly, its edges chipped as if moved before. He pressed against it, and the stone shifted inward with a hollow sound. A compartment revealed itself, narrow but deep. Inside lay a second key, smaller than the first, its handle shaped like a cross. Beside it was a rolled parchment sealed with red wax. Ethan drew it out, breaking the seal. The parchment unfurled to reveal a map, sketched in fading ink. It showed the estate grounds, the house, the orchard, and the outbuildings. But beneath the main house was another set of lines, tunnels branching like veins into the earth. At the center, marked with an X, was a chamber larger than the rest. Ethan stared at it, his mind racing. This was no mere cellar. His uncle had carved a labyrinth beneath the house, and the rusted key had only opened the first door. The minor key would lead deeper, into the heart of secrets. He folded the map carefully and slid it into his jacket. The journal and the key he placed securely in his pack. Then he sat in the chamber for a long while, his lamp flickering, his thoughts weaving together fragments of understanding. His uncle had left him this estate not to mock him, but to challenge him. Marcus and Clara had been blind, too consumed by greed and scorn to see. But Ethan was different. He had endured war, loss, and ridicule. His uncle had chosen him because he could carry the weight of secrets without breaking. The sound of footsteps startled him, distant, muffled, but real. Ethan snuffed the lamp quickly, plunging the chamber into darkness. He pressed his back to the wall, shadow growling low at his side. The footsteps grew louder, descending the passage he had come through. Ethan's hand closed around the combat knife at his belt. The flicker of another lantern appeared at the doorway. A figure stepped inside, tall, broad-shouldered, moving with deliberate caution. Marcus's voice echoed softly, dripping with contempt. "I knew you'd come sniffing around down here, cousin. Thought you could keep it all to yourself." Ethan's grip tightened. Marcus stepped closer, the lantern light revealing his smug grin, his eyes gleaming with greed. Shadow growled louder, teeth bared, but Marcus only laughed. "So it's true," he said. "There is something worth hiding, and I will have it." Ethan stepped from the shadows, his voice low and steady. "This house is mine. These secrets are mine. You will leave." Marcus sneered. "You think you're the chosen one, the golden soldier returned from war. But you're just a broken man clinging to scraps. I'll take what I want, just like I always have." The tension snapped like a taut wire. Shadow lunged, his bark thunderous in the small chamber. Marcus stumbled back, his lantern clattering to the floor, its flame sputtering. Ethan seized the moment, shoving Marcus hard against the wall. The knife pressed close enough to silence his laughter. "Leave," Ethan growled, his voice carrying the weight of years of restraint, of battles fought within and without. "Leave now, or this house will bury you before it buries me." Marcus's bravado faltered. His eyes flicked to the growling dog and Ethan's unyielding gaze. Slowly, he raised his hands in mock surrender. "Very well, cousin," he hissed. "Enjoy your ruins while you can, but remember this. Secrets have a way of devouring those who cling to them." He slipped past, retreating into the passage, his footsteps fading. Ethan stood in the silence that followed, his breath heavy, Shadow's growl slowly subsiding. The chamber seemed to pulse around him, alive with secrets and dangers. He relit his lamp, the flame pushing back the dark once more. He glanced at the journal, the map, and the keys, and knew that Marcus would not be the last to come searching. The inheritance was no longer a burden or a mockery. It was a war of its own, one he had no choice but to fight. Ethan closed the chest and shouldered his pack. He whispered a single word to Shadow: forward. Together, they left the chamber, stepping back into the labyrinth of tunnels, the rusted key clinking softly as though marking the rhythm of destiny itself. The house's secrets were only beginning to reveal themselves, and Ethan knew that endurance alone would not be enough. This was no longer about inheritance. It was about survival, truth, and the test his uncle had left him to face. The night stretched long above the manor, the sky bruised with clouds that drifted like shadows of another world. Ethan sat at the edge of his bed, the journal open across his knees, though his eyes lingered not on the ink but on the distance beyond the cracked window. The rusted key lay on the table beside him, its metallic glint catching what little light the oil lamp offered. Shadow lay at his feet, his breathing steady, his warmth grounding Ethan against the tide of memories threatening to overtake him. For years he had avoided thinking too deeply about the war. The chaos of it still lived in his bones, in the ragged scars that stretched across his chest and leg, in the ringing in his ears when the night grew too quiet. But the house's silence stirred the echoes he had long tried to bury. The secret tunnels, the journals, the hidden map, were puzzles demanding focus, but in the quiet moments between discovery, the ghosts came. He remembered the desert first, the endless heat pressing down like a cruel hand. Sand clung to his skin, found its way into every crevice of gear and weapon. He remembered the convoy, rolling slowly through open plains, every soldier on edge, waiting for the inevitable explosion. And it had come, a blinding flash, a roar that split the world, and the truck ahead was consumed in fire. Screams followed, men he had laughed with the night before, swallowed by smoke and blood. Ethan had leapt into action then, dragging bodies from the flames, his hands blistered, his lungs filled with smoke, his ears ringing with the echo of a world unraveling. It was in that chaos that Shadow first appeared. A military working dog, trained and disciplined, fierce in combat, but loyal beyond measure. They had thrown him into Ethan's unit for patrols, and from the start, they understood each other. Shadow had saved his life more than once, pulling him from the path of enemy fire, warning him of danger Ethan's eyes could not see. When others fell, Shadow remained, a constant presence in a war where constants were rare. One night, in the ruins of a bombed-out village, Ethan had sat with Shadow beside him, staring into a fire that gave more smoke than warmth. The distant sound of artillery echoed in the distance, and the stars above looked cold and indifferent. A younger soldier asked Ethan what he would do if he survived and returned home. Ethan had not answered then, because he had not known. Survival itself had been the only goal, the only dream. Sitting in his uncle's manor, he realized he did not know. Shadow stirred, lifting his head, ears twitching as though he remembered. Ethan leaned down, resting a hand on the dog's fur. "You saved me then," he whispered. "And now it seems you are keeping me again." The war had left Ethan with more than wounds and memories. It had left him with silence. In crowded rooms, he struggled to find words. Among family, he had become the ghost at the table, the subject of whispers rather than conversation. Clara once asked him why he never spoke of what he had seen or told the stories others demanded. But he could not. To talk of it was to relive it. He had already lived it enough. Yet, within these walls, he found himself forced to confront it. His uncle's words, scrawled in that journal, "For the one who endures," felt like they had been written directly to him. Endurance was all he had known. Endurance of war, of loss, of mockery, of silence. Perhaps his uncle had understood. Maybe he had known that Ethan's strength was not in wealth or charm but in survival. He turned the pages of the journal again, reading passages about debts collected and land purchased quietly through false names. It became clear that his uncle had amassed money and influence, and he had hidden it all beneath layers of secrecy. Ethan wondered if the older man had also endured in silence, carrying burdens unseen, hiding them even from those closest to him. A gust of wind rattled the window, pulling Ethan back to the present. He rose, stretching his sore muscles, and gazed into the night. The orchard stretched beyond, gnarled trees swaying gently in the breeze. The branches looked like twisted arms, reaching for something unseen. Somewhere beyond them lay the X marked on the map. Somewhere beyond them, more secrets awaited. But the war had taught Ethan patience. Charging unthinkingly into danger was folly. Preparation, caution, and endurance were the tools of survival. He would study the map further, piece together the puzzles in the journal, and move step by step, as he had done on patrols through hostile ground. He thought of Marcus again, his sneer, his threats. Marcus was not a man who gave up easily. The intrusion into the cellar had proved that. He would be back, perhaps with help, perhaps with force. Clara might distance herself now, but Ethan knew she watched from afar, weighing her chances. The family's laughter might echo still, but beneath it lay envy, and envy was a dangerous thing. Ethan lay back on the bed, the journal resting on his chest, the key gleaming faintly in the lamplight. He closed his eyes, but sleep did not come easily. Instead, dreams of the battlefield returned. He heard the whistle of incoming shells, the crack of rifles, and the cries of comrades. He felt the weight of sand, the heat of fire, the sting of smoke, and always, at the center of it, shadow. The dog stood unyielding in the chaos, a figure of loyalty and courage, leading him through darkness. When Ethan woke, dawn broke, pale light seeping into the room. Shadow was already awake, tail thumping gently against the floor as if to say it was time to rise. Ethan dressed quickly, fastening his boots, slipping the journal into his pack. He tucked the more minor key and the map into an inner pocket close to his heart. He strapped his knife to his belt, the weight familiar and comforting. Outside, the air was crisp, carrying the scent of earth and dew. The orchard loomed ahead, silent and still. Ethan walked the row slowly, Shadow trotting at his side. The trees stood like sentinels, their bark rough, their branches clawing at the sky. He studied the map as he walked, aligning the sketch with the ground before him. The X lay deep within the orchard, where the trees grew oldest and most twisted. As he approached, he noticed the ground sloping gently downward. He found what he was searching for at the base of one massive oak, its trunk hollowed and scarred, a stone slab, half buried in roots and earth, its edges straight and deliberate. Ethan knelt, brushing away dirt, revealing the outline of a hidden entrance. Shadow sniffed at it, whining softly, tail wagging with excitement. Ethan ran his fingers over the stone, feeling the cold surface, the faint grooves carved by hands long dead. He reached into his pocket, pulling out the minor key. Its cross-shaped handle gleamed faintly in the morning light. He knew then that this was the next step, the door waiting to be opened. The battlefield of his past had prepared him for this, not with weapons, but with resolve. His uncle had left behind more than secrets. He had left a trial, a labyrinth of endurance, meant only for one who could bear it. Ethan looked down at Shadow, who gazed back with steady eyes. Together, they would descend into whatever lay below. Together, they would face not only the mysteries of the house, but the ghosts that followed them from faraway battlefields. He rose, the key clutched tightly in his hand, and whispered into the silence of the orchard, "For the one who endures." Then, with Shadow at his side, he began uncovering the stone, ready to face whatever waited in the depths. The sun climbed slowly over the horizon, its light weak and filtered through a thin veil of clouds as Ethan crouched in the orchard with the stone slab before him. His hands were raw from clawing away at roots and dirt, his nails dark with earth. Shadow paced around the hollow oak, pausing occasionally to sniff the ground and bark sharply, as though encouraging his master onward. The cross-shaped key weighed heavily in Ethan's pocket, a silent reminder that this was no random discovery. His uncle had left these doors for him and him alone, hidden beneath the twisted branches of trees that had once borne fruit. The slab resisted his efforts, stubbornly clinging to the earth that had swallowed it over the decades. Ethan's muscles ached as he wedged his knife into the cracks, prying inch by inch until the stone shifted. Sweat mixed with dirt on his forehead, but he pushed harder, every grunt of effort matched by Shadow's impatient growls. Finally, groaning like an old giant disturbed from slumber, the slab shifted enough to reveal a dark cavity beneath. Cold air wafted upward, carrying the scent of damp stone and age-old secrets. Ethan sat back on his heels, his chest rising and falling with deep breaths. He peered into the opening. A narrow stone staircase descended into the earth, worn and slick, spiraling downward into shadow. He reached into his pack, pulling out the oil lamp, and lit it with trembling fingers. The flame sputtered before steadying, casting its glow over the opening. The steps below flickered into view, inviting yet foreboding. He turned to Shadow, who stood poised at the hole's edge, tail wagging but ears alert. Ethan gave a faint smile. Together, he whispered and lowered himself onto the first step. The descent was slow. The staircase narrowed quickly, pressing close around him, the air heavy with moisture. The stone walls wept with condensation, and dripping water echoed faintly. Ethan's boots scraped against the uneven steps, each one worn by feet that had passed long before him. The lamp flame danced, its light swallowed by the darkness below. Shadow followed without hesitation, his claws clicking softly on the stone, his breath steady and reassuring. After what felt like an eternity, the staircase opened into a chamber. Ethan stepped cautiously onto the dirt floor, raising the lamp high. The room was larger than he expected, circular, its ceiling vaulted with rough stone. Roots dangled from above, twisting downward like skeletal fingers. Against one wall, a set of wooden shelves sagged under the weight of boxes and scrolls. Against another, a stone table stood, its surface carved with symbols Ethan did not recognize. And in the center of the room was a pedestal, low and square, upon which sat a small iron chest. The chest was locked, its face bearing the shape of a cross. Ethan felt the key burn against his leg as though alive. He drew it from his pocket, holding it in the lamplight. The engravings on its handle matched perfectly with the carved shape on the chest. For a long moment, he stood motionless, his breath shallow. This was the heart of it, the reason for the map, the journals, the secrets. His uncle's voice seemed to echo, "For the one who endures," in his mind. He knelt before the chest and slid the key into the lock. It turned with surprising ease, the mechanism inside clicking cleanly. Slowly, he lifted the lid. The hinges groaned and the chest exhaled a breath of stale air. Inside lay stacks of envelopes, bound together with string, their seals unbroken, and beside them rested ledgers filled with neat handwriting, columns of numbers, and names. At the bottom, a bundle is wrapped in oilcloth. Ethan lifted the bundle carefully, unwrapping it with cautious hands. The cloth peeled away to reveal deeds, official documents stamped with seals, granting ownership of vast tracts of land. Not only the estate, but properties scattered across counties. Ethan's eyes widened as he realized the scope. His uncle had hidden wealth not in banks but in land, concealed from taxes, greedy relatives, and the world's prying eyes. Shadow barked suddenly, startling Ethan. The dog's ears pricked toward the staircase, his body stiff. Ethan froze, listening. Faint, muffled sounds echoed down the stairwell. Footsteps, voices. He extinguished the lamp quickly, plunging the chamber into darkness. Shadow pressed against his leg, growling low. The voices grew clearer. Marcus's brash tone carried through the tunnel, accompanied by another unfamiliar voice, deeper and more menacing. Ethan cursed under his breath. Marcus had not come alone. Clutching the bundle of deeds to his chest, Ethan moved swiftly to the far wall where the roots hung thickest. He had noticed earlier a narrow crevice behind them, half concealed. He found a tight passage, barely wide enough for his shoulders. He crouched low, pulling Shadow after him, as light from another lamp spilled into the chamber they had just vacated. From his hiding place, Ethan peered through the roots. Marcus entered first, his lantern high, his expression greedy and eager. Behind him came a man Ethan did not recognize. Tall, broad, with scars crisscrossing his face and hands like maps of violence. His eyes scanned the chamber sharply, calculating and cold. This was no relative, no curious neighbor. This was muscle, hired and dangerous. Marcus's laughter rang against the stone. "I told you," he said, his voice smug. "He found something here. I could smell it on him." The man grunted, his gaze sweeping the room. "Then where is it?" he asked, his voice low and rough. Ethan's grip tightened on the bundle in his hands. He knew he could not stay hidden long. Marcus would search, and the stranger would not hesitate to use force. The orchard above felt suddenly far away, unreachable. The chamber was a trap now. The only escape was through the narrow crevice behind him. He whispered to Shadow, "Quiet." The dog seemed to understand, stilling his growl though his body trembled with tension. Ethan began to move backward through the passage, his shoulders scraping the stone inch by inch, the bundle pressed tight against his chest. The darkness pressed around him, suffocating, but he forced himself onward, each step deliberate. Behind him, Marcus's voice rose, frustrated. "Where is it?" he shouted. "He found something, I know he did." The stranger's reply was colder, sharper. "Then we will see him." Ethan pushed harder, the crevice opening at last into another tunnel. He stumbled forward, Shadow slipping out beside him. The passage curved upward, leading toward faint light. Relief surged as he realized it must lead back to the surface, another exit his uncle had built into the labyrinth. He finally emerged into the orchard, the morning light blessing his dirt-streaked face. Shadow bounded out beside him, shaking off dust. Ethan gasped for breath, clutching the deeds close. He knew Marcus and his hired brute would not stop searching. They would crawl through the tunnels, tearing the place apart, until they found him, or what he carried. For the first time since the will was read, Ethan felt the full weight of what his uncle had left him. This was not simply an inheritance. It was a battlefield, one his family would not hesitate to claim with teeth and blood. He was no longer only a soldier haunted by the past. He was the guardian of something immense, something dangerous. He looked down at Shadow, who gazed back with unflinching loyalty. "We endure," Ethan whispered, his voice firm. His uncle's challenge was no longer just a riddle to solve. It was a war of endurance, and he would fight it as he had fought all others. Step by step, breath by breath, with the dog who had never left his side. The orchard stood silent around him, but Ethan knew it would not remain so for long. Marcus would emerge sooner or later, angry and determined, and he would bring more men if needed. The laughter of his relatives no longer echoed in his mind. Instead, it was replaced by the drumbeat of purpose. The house's secrets had begun to reveal themselves, and Ethan was ready to defend them. He glanced again at the hollow oak, the stone slab now ajar like a mouth whispering warnings. The path ahead was dangerous, uncertain, but it was his. With Shadow trotting faithfully beside him, Ethan turned toward the manor, clutching the bundle tight, determined to uncover every truth buried beneath the soil and within the walls, no matter what enemies awaited. The day passed under a veil of unease. Ethan moved through the manor with the bundle of deeds, never leaving his sight, his steps heavy as though the weight of responsibility pressed harder than the bundle itself. Every creak of the old wood, every groan of the walls seemed amplified, as if the house were alive and listening. Shadow shadowed his every step, his senses sharp, ears twitching at sounds beyond Ethan's hearing. The discovery beneath the orchard had been more than he could have imagined, but with it came the certainty that Marcus would not retreat quietly. Ethan laid the deeds out across the study desk, smoothing the fragile papers beneath his calloused hands. His uncle's handwriting scrawled in the margins of some documents, meticulous notes about land acquisitions, false identities, and trusts hidden away from public records. It was not just wealth, it was an empire crafted in silence, buried in the soil of secrecy. Ethan felt a strange mixture of awe and dread. The question gnawed at him. Why had his uncle hidden all this from the world, and why had he chosen Ethan to inherit it? The sound of tires crunching against gravel broke his thoughts. Ethan froze, the hairs on the back of his neck rising. Shadow growled low in his throat, already turning toward the window. Ethan moved quickly, extinguishing the lamp and slipping the documents into their bundle. He pressed them into a false drawer beneath the desk just as the front door rattled under a heavy knock. He stepped into the hall, knife at his side, and opened the door. Marcus stood there, his grin stretched wide. the morning sun glinting off his polished shoes and tailored suit. But he was not alone. Two men flanked him, broad-shouldered, their eyes cold and empty. The kind of men who had known violence and learned to enjoy it. "Cousin," Marcus greeted, his tone dripping with false warmth. "I thought I might come and check on you. See how you're enjoying your inheritance." Ethan's jaw tightened. "This house is mine," he said evenly. "You have no place here." Marcus chuckled, stepping inside without invitation, his men following like shadows. The manor seemed to shrink around them, the air thick with tension. Marcus strolled through the hall, running his fingers along the dust-coated railing, pretending to admire. "Such history here," he mused. "Shame it all went to waste on you." Ethan stood his ground, Shadow at his side, lips curled in a silent snarl. "Get out," Ethan said, his voice firm. Marcus turned, his grin fading into something sharper. "Let's not play games, cousin. We both know there's more here than rotten wood and ghosts. I saw the tunnels. I saw what you found. You think you can hide it from me? From us?" His words were venomous, each one meant to provoke. Ethan said nothing, his silence a shield. Marcus stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. "You always thought endurance made you strong, but endurance without power is just suffering. Give me what is mine, or I will take it." The threat hung heavy in the air. Ethan's hand brushed the hilt of his knife, his body tensed like a bowstring. Shadow's growl deepened, filling the hall like a warning drumbeat. One of Marcus's men shifted forward, his bulk blocking the light from the door. Marcus raised a hand, stopping him, his smile returning. "Not yet," he murmured. "Ethan deserves the courtesy of choice." Ethan's voice was steady when he finally spoke. "There is nothing here for you. Leave now, before you regret staying." Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Regret is for the weak. You've always been feeble, Ethan, hiding behind silence, behind loyalty to a dog. What will you do when men like me come for what you hold?" Ethan's patience snapped. He stepped forward, his knife flashing from its sheath, the blade gleaming in the dim light. Marcus's men shifted again, ready to move, but Shadow leapt forward with a feral bark, his teeth bared, his body coiled to strike. The hall trembled with tension, the line between words and violence thinning to nothing. Marcus raised his hands in mock surrender, though his grin did not falter. "Very well, cousin," he said softly. "I see we will not settle this today. But know this, secrets have a way of slipping through cracks. You cannot guard them forever. They will be mine when you fall asleep and let your guard down." He stepped backward slowly, his men following, their eyes locked on Ethan like predators marking prey. At the door, Marcus paused, his voice dropping to a whisper. "This is not over." Then he was gone, the sound of his car tires fading down the gravel path, leaving silence behind. Ethan stood in the hall, his chest heaving, the knife still clenched in his hand. Shadow pressed against his leg, steady and loyal. The house felt colder now, as though Marcus's presence had seeped into its walls. Ethan sheathed the knife and returned to the study. He pulled the bundle of deeds from its hiding place, staring at them with new eyes. Marcus knew too much already. The tunnels, chests, and secrets were no longer safe. His uncle's empire was under threat, and Ethan was its only guardian. The war had taught him that enemies came not only with guns but with greed. Marcus was no soldier, but his ruthlessness made him dangerous in ways even the battlefield had not prepared Ethan for. He could not simply wait and endure. He would have to fight, not with silence, but with action. That night, Ethan moved through the manor with determination. He mapped the tunnels again, tracing the parchment lines by lantern light. He memorized every hidden door, every passage, every escape route. He cleaned his weapons, checked his supplies, and prepared for the siege he knew was coming. In the quiet hours before dawn, he sat again at the desk, the journal open. His uncle's words burned on the page, "For the one who endures." Ethan understood now. Endurance was not only about surviving pain, it was about withstanding threats, facing enemies, and protecting what others would seek to destroy. Shadow lay at his feet, his breathing steady, his presence a comfort. Ethan reached down, scratching behind his ears. "We endure," he whispered, "but this time we fight too." The manor groaned around him, its walls heavy with secrets, its halls dark with history. But in that darkness, Ethan found resolve. Marcus would return, greedy and relentless, and when he did, Ethan would be ready. The battle for the inheritance had begun, and it would not end with words. It would end with the strength, cunning, and endurance his uncle had trusted him to wield. Outside, the wind howled through the orchard, rustling the gnarled branches as though the earth itself prepared for the storm to come. Ethan leaned back in his chair, the knife gleaming on the desk beside the bundle of deeds. His gaze was stern, his mind unyielding. Marcus could bring his laughter, his threats, his hired brutes. The manor would stand, and so would Ethan. The night stretched on, but Ethan did not sleep. The soldier in him had awakened once more, and this time, the battlefield was not desert or ruin but the home his uncle had left behind. And he would not surrender it. Morning broke gray and muted, the light that painted the world in shades of uncertainty. Ethan had not slept. He sat in the study, surrounded by maps, deeds, and journals, his eyes heavy but sharp with resolve. Shadow dozed lightly near the fireplace, his ears twitching at every sound, even in sleep. The house seemed alive with tension, each groan of its beams echoing the strain Ethan carried within himself. Marcus would return, and next time he would not come merely to threaten. A knock on the door startled him. It was not heavy and demanding like Marcus's, but light, almost hesitant. Ethan rose cautiously, hand brushing the hilt of his knife as he approached. Shadow was already on his feet, tail stiff, gaze fixed on the door. Ethan pulled it open slowly. There was Mrs. Whitmore, the elderly neighbor who lived a mile down the road. Her back was bent with age, her silver hair tucked beneath a faded scarf, but her eyes were bright and watchful. She held a basket of bread in her hands, wrapped in cloth, and her expression carried something more than courtesy. "Morning, Ethan," she said, her voice steady despite her years. "Use a bit of company, and perhaps some truth." Ethan studied her, searching for hidden motives. But there was only sincerity in her eyes. He stepped aside, allowing her in. She moved through the foyer with familiarity, her gaze sweeping the old walls as though measuring their weight. Shadow sniffed at her hem and wagged his tail, granting his quiet approval. They sat in the kitchen, where dust motes swirled in the thin shafts of light. Mrs. Whitmore placed the basket on the table and folded her hands, leaning forward. "You've uncovered something, haven't you?" she said softly. "Something your uncle meant only for you." Ethan stiffened, though he did not answer. Her eyes narrowed knowingly. "I knew this day would come. Your uncle told me enough to understand. Not the details, never the details. He was a secretive man, God rest him. But he trusted me, knowing that what he left behind would not be easily claimed. He meant it for one who had strength in silence. And I see now why he chose you." Ethan leaned forward, his voice low. "What do you know of him? What do you know of this house?" Mrs. Whitmore sighed, her hands trembling faintly. "Your uncle was not always the man you remember. When he was younger, he was clever and ambitious. He built fortunes quietly, while others wasted theirs on appearances. But he trusted no one, not even his blood. He saw greed in them early, saw how it poisoned hearts, so he began to hide, not just wealth, but truth. He told me once that when the time came, only the one who had endured would inherit his true legacy." She paused, her eyes meeting his. "He spoke of you often in those final years, Ethan. Said you were different. The war had carved something into you that neither Marcus nor Clara could understand." Ethan's chest tightened. He had never known his uncle to speak kindly of him, never known there was even a trace of regard. The man had seemed distant, aloof, a figure of stern silence. To hear otherwise unsettled him. Mrs. Whitmore reached into her shawl and withdrew a folded letter. Its edges frayed, the ink faded. She said, "He left this with me years ago," sliding it across the table. "Told me to keep it safe until the rightful heir arrived. I believe it is meant for you." Ethan unfolded the paper carefully. The handwriting was unmistakably his uncle's, bold and precise. The words struck like iron. "To the one who endures. If you read this, you have found your way into the labyrinth." The wealth and land are but a shell of what I leave behind. The true inheritance is knowledge, hidden where greed will never think to look. There are records of men who betrayed me, debts unpaid, and enemies who would see this family ruined. They will come for it if they learn it exists. Guard it well. Trust no one who seeks it openly. You will be tested not by treasure, but by the hands that would steal it. Endure, and you will prevail. Fail, and all will be lost. Ethan folded the letter again, his jaw tight. Marcus already knew too much. If this knowledge fell into his hands, it would destroy the family name and perhaps more. The empire his uncle built was fragile, its strength bound to secrecy. One breach could unravel it all. Mrs. Whitmore watched him silently, her eyes filled with quiet sorrow. "I fear Marcus will not stop," she said. "He has always been consumed by envy, and now he has found dangerous men to do his bidding. You must be careful." Ethan looked at her sharply. "Who are these men?" She shook her head. "Outsiders, ruthless, the kind who thrive on violence and profit. Your uncle warned me long ago that such men would circle like vultures when the time came. That is why he chose you, not because you are strong, but because you know what it means to fight for survival." Ethan leaned back, his mind churning. The letter, the deeds, the tunnels, Marcus's threats, all pieces of a puzzle that grew darker with each revelation. His uncle had not left him wealth alone. He had left him a war, one waged in shadows and silence. Mrs. Whitmore rose slowly, her frail hands gripping the back of her chair. "I am too old to fight battles, Ethan, but I can give you this truth. Trust the dog at your side. Trust the silence within you. And remember, endurance is not only surviving what is before you, but preparing for what is to come." She placed a hand gently on his shoulder before turning to leave. Shadow followed her to the door, his tail wagging once before he returned to Ethan. The older woman stepped into the morning light, her figure small against the vast orchard, yet her presence lingered long after she had gone. Ethan sat alone with the letter, his thoughts heavy. His uncle's words echoed in his mind, mingling with the memory of Marcus's sneer. "Guard it well. Trust no one. You will be tested." He rose, moving to the study once more. He pulled the journal from its place and laid it beside the letter. His uncle's handwriting filled both, a legacy of secrets written in ink and silence. Ethan traced the words with his finger, feeling the weight of their meaning. This was no longer about inheritance or proving himself against laughter. This was about survival, about protecting a legacy from those who would twist it into ruin. Outside, the orchard swayed in the wind, its branches whispering like voices of the past. Shadow rested his head on Ethan's knee, his eyes steady and unyielding. Ethan looked down at him, a faint smile breaking the hard line of his mouth. "We endure," he whispered, "and now we fight." The manor groaned around him, its walls heavy with history, its tunnels deep with secrets. Ethan gathered the letter, the journal, the deeds, and the map, securing them in his pack. He strapped his knife to his belt, his soldier's instincts sharpening again. Marcus would return, not with laughter but with fire, and when he did, Ethan would be ready. For the first time since stepping into the ruin of his inheritance, Ethan felt not like a man burdened by secrets, but like a guardian chosen by them. His uncle's legacy was now his war. He would meet it with the endurance carved into him by battlefields and silence. The day grew brighter, but in Ethan's heart the shadows deepened. The revelation had come, and with it was the certainty that the test was only beginning. The storm announced itself long before it arrived. By late afternoon, the air had thickened, heavy with the scent of rain and charged with a restless electricity. Clouds gathered above the orchard, churning like smoke from some invisible fire. The manor groaned against the rising wind, its shutters rattling, its old timbers creaking as if bracing for what was to come. Ethan stood at the cracked window of the study, watching the sky darken, his reflection pale in the glass. Shadow paced restlessly behind him, ears pricked, sensing more than weather. The house was ready in its way, Ethan had prepared for this moment since Marcus's last visit. The deeds and documents were secured in hidden compartments, the journal and letter close at hand. He had traced every tunnel, mapped every escape, sharpened every blade. Yet even as he checked his preparations, a hollow knot formed in his stomach. He knew Marcus would return, not with mockery, but with violence, and the storm was his cover. The first drops of rain spattered against the window, sharp and cold. The orchard outside swayed violently, branches thrashing as if trying to tear themselves free from the ground. Thunder rolled across the sky, a low growl that seemed to rise from the earth. Ethan turned from the window, his jaw tight. He strapped his knife to his belt and lifted the lantern. Shadow pressed close, his body tense, his growl a low warning hum. The knock at the door came like a clap of thunder, hard and insistent. Ethan froze, listening. A second knock followed, heavier, accompanied by the unmistakable sound of boots on the porch. Without a word, Ethan moved to the foyer, Shadow beside him. He opened the door just enough to see. Marcus stood there, soaked from the rain, his grin sharp and cruel. Behind him were three men, their bulk filling the porch, their eyes cold as the storm. One carried a crowbar, another a chain length, the third nothing but his fists. These were not men who came to talk. "Cousin," Marcus called over the roar of the wind, his voice slick with malice. "We thought we'd visit you. The storm's a perfect night for digging up old secrets, don't you think?" Ethan said nothing. He opened the door wider, his presence filling the frame, Shadow growling at his side. "This house is mine," Ethan said, his voice steady. "Leave now, before the storm buries you." Marcus laughed, shaking his head as rain streamed down his face. "Always so dramatic. You think you can hold on to this place with silence and stubbornness, but silence does not stop men like me." He gestured to the brutes at his back. "Strength does." The men stepped forward, their weapons catching flashes of lightning. Ethan's hand tightened on the lantern. He stepped back slowly, drawing them in, his mind calculating every angle, every escape. Shadow's growl rose to a snarl, teeth bared. The first man swung the crowbar, aiming for Ethan's shoulder. Ethan ducked, the metal smashing into the doorframe, splinters flying. He drove his elbow into the man's gut, forcing him back. Shadow lunged at the second, his jaws clamping onto the chain wielder's arm, tearing cloth and drawing blood. The man howled, swinging wildly as Shadow dragged him down. Marcus shouted orders, his grin faltering as chaos erupted in the foyer. The third man charged, fists raised, but Ethan met him head-on. The knife flashed in his hand, not to kill but to cut shallow across the man's forearm, enough to send him stumbling back with a cry of pain. Thunder boomed, shaking the manor as the fight spilled into the hall. Lightning flashed through the windows, illuminating the struggle in stark bursts. Ethan moved with the instinct of a soldier. Every motion was deliberate, and every strike was calculated. He fought, not for glory but for survival, his body remembering the rhythm of battle long after his mind had tried to forget. Shadow was everywhere at once, a blur of teeth and fury, his growls echoing through the hall. He leapt, bit, and dragged men to the ground, protecting Ethan with a ferocity born of loyalty. The chain clattered against stone as the second man tried to rise, but Shadow dragged him back down, teeth sinking deeper until the storm swallowed the man's screams. Marcus retreated toward the study, his eyes wild. He grabbed at the desk, yanking drawers, searching for what he believed was hidden there. Ethan saw him and surged forward, shoving the last brutes aside. He caught Marcus by the collar, slamming him against the wall, the knife at his throat. Ethan growled, "You will never have this," his voice thundering in the storm. Not the house, not the secrets, not the legacy. Marcus sneered, even as blood trickled from his lip. "You think you can keep it, cousin. You think you can hold on to something that was never yours. But secrets do not belong to men like you. They belong to those willing to use them." Ethan pressed the blade closer, the tip drawing a thin line of red. Marcus's bravado faltered, his grin breaking into a grimace. Lightning flashed again, illuminating the fear in his eyes. "Leave," Ethan said, his voice cold and final. "Leave, or this storm will be your grave." Silence hung between them for a moment, broken only by the storm outside and the ragged breaths of the men sprawled on the floor. Then Marcus shoved away, spitting at Ethan's boots. "Very well, cousin," he hissed, "but this is not over. You cannot fight the storm forever." He stumbled back, gesturing to his men. They gathered themselves, bleeding and limping, and retreated into the night. The door slammed shut behind them, the wind howling louder as if mocking their departure. Ethan stood in the hall, chest heaving, the knife still in his hand. Shadow returned to his side, blood on his muzzle, but eyes clear, his loyalty unshaken. Together, they stood in the silence that followed, the house breathing with them, the storm raging outside. The fight had been won, but Ethan knew it was only the beginning. Marcus would return with more men, more rage, more determination. The storm had been only a glimpse of the war to come. He returned to the study, clutching the bundle of deeds tightly and retrieving it from its hiding place. His uncle's letter burned in his memory. "Guard it well. Trust no one. You will be tested." Shadow rested at his feet, weary but unbroken. Ethan looked down at him, his hand brushing the dog's fur. "We endure," he whispered, "and we fight." Outside, the storm raged on, lightning splitting the sky, thunder shaking the earth. But a soldier and his dog stood firm within the manor, ready for whatever came next. The actual battle had only just begun, and Ethan felt the weight of destiny pressing harder with each passing moment. The storm lingered into the next morning, its fury subsiding but leaving behind a sky the color of lead and fields soaked with water. The manor smelled of damp stone and old wood, the smell that clung to skin and clothes, reminding Ethan of trenches dug in foreign soil. He rose from the chair in the study, his body aching from the night's fight, his knuckles bruised and swollen. Shadow rested nearby, his chest rising and falling with steady breaths, one ear twitching whenever the wind rattled the shutters. Ethan's eyes fell again to the bundle of documents that had become the heart of his inheritance. He spread them across the desk, the edges curling with age, the ink faded but legible. The deeds alone told a story of wealth hidden in plain sight. There were tracts of farmland purchased decades earlier under false names, mines in distant states producing steady income, and even shipping interests that stretched to distant ports. His uncle had been meticulous, hiding assets where no one could trace them. But beyond the deeds and ledgers lay something more unsettling. Ethan unfolded a series of letters bound together with twine, their wax seals cracked but intact. He read slowly, his eyes narrowing with every line. These were not records of property but of men, powerful men in politics and business, who had borrowed from his uncle. Men who owed him favors and money. Men who had built their own empires on the silent backing of his fortune. The language was careful, but the meaning was unmistakable. His uncle had not only hidden wealth, he had held leverage over men whose reputations depended on secrecy. Ethan saw names he recognized from headlines, men lauded as philanthropists, visionaries, pillars of the community. And yet here, in his hands, were letters of debt, admissions of scandal, agreements signed in desperation. His uncle had built an empire of shadows, one not only of land and money, but of control. Ethan felt a cold weight settle in his chest. This was why his uncle had chosen him, not for the land or the wealth, but for the ability to guard these truths. If these documents fell into the wrong hands, the lives of powerful men could crumble, and the chaos would spread far beyond the Hale family. Shadow lifted his head, growling softly as if sensing Ethan's unease. Ethan reached down, absently stroking the dog's fur, his mind racing. Marcus had seen only the promise of riches. He had no idea of the true power hidden here. He would stop at nothing, not even blood, to claim it if he did. Ethan turned the pages of the journal once more, finding passages he had overlooked. His uncle's handwriting filled the margins with cryptic notes. "Guard the orchard," one line read. "They will search above, but the roots hold the truth." Another said, "The one who endures must also choose what to reveal and what to bury forever." He sat back heavily in the chair, the words echoing in his mind. This was not a mere inheritance. It was a burden, a dangerous gift. His uncle had left him not with gold or jewels, but with secrets that could topple the reputations of kingdoms. And he had left them to a soldier, A man trained not in business or politics but in survival. That may have been the point. The sound of wheels on gravel reached his ears. Ethan stiffened, rising to his feet. Shadow was already at the window, ears pricked, tail rigid. Ethan peered through the crack in the shutter. A carriage approached, drawn by a pair of black horses, its polished frame gleaming despite the mud. It was not Marcus's car. This was something different. Moments later, a knock came at the door. It was not the violent pounding of hired thugs, but a measured, deliberate knock that carried authority. Ethan hesitated, then opened the door. A tall man stood there, dressed in a dark coat, his hair silver, his eyes sharp as steel. He introduced himself as Mr. Donovan, the family lawyer who had read the will. But his presence here, unannounced and at such an hour, unsettled Ethan. "May I come in?" Donovan asked, his voice smooth but edged with something unreadable. "There are matters we must discuss." Ethan stepped aside reluctantly, keeping his hand close to the knife at his belt. Donovan entered the study, eyes sweeping over the documents on the desk with too much interest. "I see you have been busy," he said softly. Ethan's voice was cautious. "Why are you here?" "Because," Donovan replied, "your uncle trusted me with more than the will." He paused, his gaze steady. "He trusted me to ensure the heir understood what he was receiving." Ethan's jaw tightened. "And what exactly am I receiving?" Donovan moved closer to the desk, his fingers brushing the edge of a ledger. "Power," he said simply. "More power than you realize. These documents are not mere records. They are weapons. They can secure alliances, destroy enemies, and build empires in the right hands. In the wrong hands, they can burn the world." Ethan studied him carefully, searching for deception. Donovan's expression was calm, but his eyes betrayed hunger, a gleam of desire he could not hide. Ethan knew then that even the lawyer could not be fully trusted. "I did not ask for power," Ethan said, his voice steady. Donovan smiled faintly. "Few who receive it do, but it has been given to you nonetheless. The question is not whether you asked for it. The question is whether you can keep it." Shadow growled again, the sound low and dangerous. Donovan glanced at the dog, his smile tightening. "You will have enemies, Mr. Ward, more than just Marcus. Men of influence will come for what you hold, men who cannot afford these truths to see daylight. You must decide if you will guard them silently or wield them as your uncle did." Ethan folded the letters slowly, sliding them back into the bundle. "My uncle trusted me to guard them, not to use them." Donovan's eyes narrowed, his voice dropping. "Guarding them will not be enough. Sooner or later, the storm will break again, forcing you to act." He straightened, brushing dust from his coat. "I will not tell you what to do, but know this, someone else will seize the advantage when you hesitate." With that, he turned and left, the sound of his carriage fading into the distance. Ethan stood in the study long after he had gone, the documents heavy in his hands, his mind a battlefield of choices. The storm outside had calmed, but inside him another storm gathered. His uncle's secrets were no longer hidden. They were alive, dangerous, pressing in on all sides. Marcus wanted wealth, Donovan hinted at power, and Ethan was left with the burden of deciding how to endure both. Shadow pressed against his leg, grounding him once more. Ethan looked down at the dog, a faint smile breaking through his tension. Whatever came next, he would not face it alone. Together, they would guard the truth, endure the trials, and fight the enemies circling closer with every passing day. The truth in the documents was both a gift and a curse. Ethan knew the time was coming, and he would have to decide which one it would be. The manor felt different after Donovan's visit, as though the air had shifted. Ethan walked the corridors with Shadow at his side, the bundle of documents heavy in his pack, and he felt the weight of unseen eyes pressing against him. Every groan of the wood, every flicker of shadow seemed to whisper caution. He trusted neither Marcus nor Donovan, and he knew both would return. Yet, as the days passed, a silence settled in, deceptive and heavy, like the calm before artillery fire on a battlefield. Ethan kept himself busy. He strengthened the barricades on the cellar doors, reinforced the windows with wood planks, and mapped out every escape route through the tunnels his uncle had carved. He trained with the knife until his arms ached, his movements as precise as they had been in combat. Shadow trained with him, lunging, holding, and releasing at command. His loyalty a shield Ethan could trust more than any human. The documents never left his sight. Each night he spread them across the desk in the study and studied them by lamplight, learning names, tracing connections, and memorizing debts. His uncle had built an intricate web that Ethan sometimes wondered if even the man had understood the full scale of his creation. Land, money, leverage, secrets, a kingdom built in shadows. And kingdoms always drew enemies. The first sign came one evening as the sun sank beyond the orchard. A sound drifted across the wind. Engines, too many to be Marcus alone. Ethan stepped to the window, his jaw tightening. Beyond the fence, headlights pierced the growing darkness. 3 cars pulled up, their doors opening in unison. Marcus stepped out first, his smirk firmly in place, but beside him were not the rough men he had brought before. These were harder, colder, dressed in dark coats, their movements efficient. Their eyes scanned the manor like soldiers approaching an objective. Ethan's pulse quickened. These men were not common thugs. They were organized, disciplined, and well-armed. He recognized the way they moved, the precision in their stances. Mercenaries. Marcus had escalated the war. Shadow growled deeply, his body low to the ground, ready. Ethan's hand brushed the knife at his belt, but he knew this would be more than knives and fists. He doused the lamp, plunging the house into darkness, and listened as the engines cut off. The knock never came. Instead, glass shattered in the back hall, the crash sharp and violent. Boots struck the floorboards. They were already inside. Ethan moved silently, his soldier's instincts guiding him. He crouched low, slipping into the shadows of the hall. Shadow followed, a silent predator. Voices echoed faintly, calm and measured, not like the panicked shouting of street thugs, but like men executing a mission. He pressed himself against the wall near the study door, listening. Marcus's voice carried higher, more desperate through the house than before. Find it, tear this place apart if you must. It is here, and it is mine. The mercenaries obeyed without hesitation, their boots pounding as they spread through the manor. Ethan's jaw clenched. He could not fight them head-on. He needed a strategy. He slipped into the study, retrieving the documents from their hiding place. The bundle fit tightly into his pack. Shadow whined softly, alert to the approaching danger. Ethan whispered a command. Quiet. The dog stilled instantly, his body tense. The mercenaries were thorough. He heard them overturning furniture, smashing doors, their voices crisp as they called to one another. Marcus barked orders, his frustration bleeding through. Ethan slipped into the tunnels beneath the house, the map in his mind guiding him. The air grew colder as they descended, the walls pressing close. But he moved quickly, every step measured. Shadow stayed close, his claws scraping softly against the stone. Behind them, shouts rose. They had found the passage. Ethan quickened his pace, sweat running down his temple. He had hoped the tunnels would buy him time, but Marcus's men were relentless. The echo of pursuit filled the underground closer with every passing moment. He reached a junction, 3 paths branching outward. He hesitated only momentarily before choosing the narrowest, one that twisted sharply. The darkness was suffocating, the lamplight weak against it. Shadow barked once, sharp and urgent, as voices closed in. The passage ended in a small chamber, bare but for stone walls, slick with moisture. Ethan pressed against them, searching for the mechanism his uncle had hinted at in his notes. Guard the orchard, the roots hold the truth. His hands brushed across the rough stone until he found it, a groove carved unnaturally. He pushed, and the wall gave way slightly, revealing a hidden exit upward. He shoved the pack through and lifted Shadow after it, the dog scrambling into the opening. Then he pulled himself up, muscles straining, and emerged into the orchard. Rain still clung to the branches, the air thick with the smell of wet earth. Lightning flashed on the horizon, illuminating rows of twisted trees. The mercenaries were close. He could hear them clambering through the tunnel, their voices sharp. Marcus's laugh echoed faintly, filled with triumph. "You cannot run forever, cousin. You will fall, and when you do, everything will be mine." Ethan crouched low, pulling Shadow close. His uncle's words pulsed in his memory. "You will be tested not by treasure, but by the hands that would steal it." This was the test. This was the war. He pulled the bundle of documents from his pack, staring at them in the faint light. They were dangerous, a weapon that could both protect and destroy. Marcus's men would not stop until they were in their hands, and Donovan's warnings now seemed prophetic. Power like this could not be hidden forever. It had to be fought for, or it had to be destroyed. Shadow pressed against him, steady as ever. Ethan exhaled slowly, resolve settling in. The last enemy had risen, not a nameless brute or a greedy cousin, but an alliance of both. Marcus's ambition and the mercenaries' violence were one force now, bearing down upon him. He slipped deeper into the orchard, the trees swallowing him in shadow. Behind him, the mercenaries spread, their flashlights cutting through the dark like spears of light. Marcus's voice urged them onward, his hunger undeniable. Ethan moved silently, his boots sinking into the wet soil, his knife gleaming faintly. Shadow padded beside him, every step measured, every sound purposeful. The orchard had become a battlefield, and Ethan knew battle well. The last enemy had risen, and the final fight was only beginning. The orchard had transformed into a war zone beneath the cloak of night. Lightning flashed in erratic bursts, throwing the twisted branches into stark relief, their shadows dancing like phantoms across the wet ground. Rain dripped from the leaves, masking footsteps, but Ethan knew the mercenaries were close. Their flashlights cut through the dark, beams sweeping back and forth, slicing across the trees like the blades of hunters. Shadow padded at his side, his movements low and purposeful, his growl humming deep in his throat. Ethan crouched behind the gnarled trunk of an oak, his breath slow and steady, his soldier's instincts taking over. The documents were strapped tight to his back, pressing against him with every breath. His uncle's words echoed in his mind. "Guard it well. Trust no one. You will be tested." He was tested now, tested in ways even war had not prepared him for. This was not a foreign battlefield. This was his home, his inheritance, his burden. Voices drifted through the orchard, clipped and precise. Marcus's tone rose above them, high and urgent. "Spread out, find him. He cannot leave these grounds." The mercenaries moved with practiced discipline, their lights sweeping in arcs, their boots crunching wet earth in rhythm. These were not amateurs. They would not falter easily. Ethan motioned to Shadow with 2 fingers. The dog slunk forward, silent as a shadow, circling wide. Ethan crept the other way, his knife gripped tight in his hand. He moved between the trees with the ease of a man who had once survived by stealth, every sense alive. The first mercenary passed close, his flashlight sweeping across Ethan's shoulder before swinging away. Ethan lunged from the darkness, catching the man's wrist, twisting it until the flashlight clattered. The knife flashed once, cutting shallow across the man's arm. The mercenary cried out, but Ethan clamped a hand over his mouth, dragging him silently into the shadows. He left the man bound in his own jacket, unconscious, and slipped away before the others could react. A second flashlight beam cut across the orchard, landing on the fallen light. Voices rose, sharper now. They knew he was near. Shadow leapt from the dark, teeth sinking into the leg of another mercenary. The man went down hard, shouting, his weapon flying from his hands. Ethan was there instantly, his knife striking, quick and efficient. The man's shout choked off into silence. Shadow released his grip and stood over the fallen enemy, growling at the beams of light converging on their position. Gunfire erupted. Bullets tore through the orchard, splintering branches, ripping bark. Ethan ducked low, dragging Shadow behind the cover of a thick trunk. The thunder of gunfire mingled with the storm's growl, chaos swallowing the night. Marcus shouted over the noise, "Do not kill him. Bring him to me. The papers are mine." Ethan's jaw tightened. Marcus wanted him alive only long enough to claim the documents, but Ethan knew his life would mean nothing once Marcus had them. The greed in Marcus's voice was a hunger that could not be sated. The mercenaries fanned out, their gunfire sporadic but relentless. Ethan's mind raced. He could not face them head-on. He needed the orchard, the tunnels, the secrets his uncle had left. He grabbed Shadow's collar, whispering urgently with me. Together they sprinted through the trees, weaving between trunks as bullets chased them. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the hollow oak ahead. Ethan slid to his knees, prying open the stone slab beneath its roots. Shadow leapt inside first, vanishing into the darkness. Ethan followed, dragging the slab back into place as gunfire struck the tree above, splinters raining down. The tunnel swallowed them, damp and cold, but mercifully silent. They moved quickly through the narrow passage, Ethan's lantern casting weak light. His breath came ragged, sweat mixing with rain on his brow. Behind them, muffled shouts echoed faintly. The mercenaries had seen him disappear. It would not be long before they followed. The tunnel twisted, leading deeper into the earth. Ethan clutched the bundle of documents tighter. This was what they wanted. This was why they hunted him like prey. He slowed, pressing his back to the wall, listening. The faint sound of boots on stone reached his ears, closer now. Marcus's voice floated through the tunnel, distorted but clear. "You cannot hide forever, cousin. Every secret you guard will be mine." Ethan's grip tightened on the knife. He looked at Shadow, who stared back with steady eyes. The dog understood. There would be no more running, not tonight. The tunnel opened into a chamber lit only by the flicker of his lamp. The stone table stood at its center, carved with symbols he did not recognize, the air thick with damp earth. Ethan set the documents upon the table, his fingers brushing the rough carvings. His uncle's words returned. The one who endures must also choose what to reveal and what to bury forever. He understood now. The documents were not just a gift, they were a choice. The mercenaries entered moments later, their flashlights slicing the darkness. Marcus followed, his grin wide, his eyes gleaming with greed. "Well done, cousin," he said smoothly. "You have led me straight to the heart of it. Now, hand it over." Ethan stood between the table and Marcus, his knife gleaming, Shadow growling at his side. "You will never have this," Ethan said. "Not while I breathe." Marcus's face twisted with rage. "You think you can stop me? You, a broken soldier, clinging to ruins. These papers were meant for me. They always should have been mine." The mercenaries raised their weapons, their lights blinding in the dark. Ethan's heart pounded, his mind flashing back to battlefields where he had stood against overwhelming odds. He had survived then, not by strength alone, but by resolve, by refusing to yield. He took a step forward, his voice low and fierce. "My uncle chose me because I endure, and I will endure this, too." The chamber erupted in violence. Ethan moved like the soldier he had been, knife flashing, body weaving through the chaos. Shadow lunged, teeth tearing, his growls reverberating against the stone walls. Gunfire exploded, deafening in the enclosed space, sparks flying as bullets struck stone. Marcus hung back, shouting, his greed driving him forward even as his men fell individually. Ethan fought with everything he had, his muscles burning, his breath ragged, his mind focused only on survival. One mercenary fell with Shadow's teeth at his throat. Another crumpled as Ethan's knife struck deep. The last mercenary raised his weapon, but Ethan was faster. He drove his shoulder into the man's chest, slamming him against the wall. The gun clattered to the ground. Ethan's knife finished what the struggle had begun. Silence followed, broken only by the storm's distant growl and Ethan's labored breathing. Shadow stood at his side, blood on his muzzle, but his eyes bright, unbroken. Marcus stood alone now, his grin gone, his face pale. He looked at the bodies of his hired men, then at Ethan, and for the first time, fear flickered in his eyes. "This is not over," he whispered, his voice trembling. Ethan raised the knife, his hand steady despite his exhaustion. "Yes, it is." Marcus stumbled back, his eyes darting wildly. He turned and fled into the tunnel, his footsteps retreating into the dark. Ethan did not follow. The fight was over, at least for now. He turned back to the documents on the stone table, their weight heavier than ever. He had fought for them, bled for them, but their power remained a burden. His uncle had been right. The choice was his now, what to guard, reveal, and bury forever. Shadow pressed against his leg, steady and loyal. Ethan sheathed the knife, his hand resting on the dog's head. Together they stood in the chamber's silence, guardians of wealth and secrets that could shape or shatter the world. The fight for the legacy was not just a battle of blades and bullets, it was a battle of choices. And Ethan knew his most significant test was still ahead. The tunnels were silent now, their damp walls echoing only the water drip and the steady rhythm of Ethan's breath. The storm outside had finally begun to ease, the thunder rolling away into the distance like a retreating army. Ethan stood at the stone table, the bundle of documents spread before him, the flicker of the lantern casting shadows across the carved symbols. Shadow lay nearby, chest heaving but strong, his muzzle stained with the remnants of the fight. The chamber smelled of iron and smoke, a reminder of the mercenaries who had fallen here, of the violence that Marcus had unleashed. Ethan closed his eyes, his hand resting on the table. His muscles ached, his knuckles burned, but the silence carried a weight he had not felt in years. For the first time since the will had been read, the laughter of his relatives did not echo in his mind. The mockery, disdain, and sneers had been drowned out by something else. Resolve. Shadow whined softly, lifting his head to watch him. Ethan crouched, pressing a hand to the dog's fur, feeling the steady pulse beneath. "You did well," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "We both did." The words were simple, but they carried more truth than any speech. Shadow licked his hand, loyal as ever, and Ethan felt a swell of gratitude that words could never contain. He turned back to the documents. Names, debts, deeds, and secrets lay before him like weapons waiting to be wielded. Marcus would return. Donovan might too. And beyond them, others would come, men whose reputations and fortunes could crumble if these papers ever saw the light. His uncle had left him not wealth but responsibility, a labyrinth of choices. Ethan knew now that the true legacy was not the power itself, but the decision of how to use it. He gathered the papers carefully, sliding them back into the bundle. Then he lifted the lantern, its flame trembling but steady, and began the slow walk back through the tunnel. The air was cooler now, carrying the faint scent of rain and earth. The upward climb left his muscles screaming, but dawn broke when he finally pushed aside the slab and stepped into the orchard. The storm had passed. The sky was streaked with pale light, the clouds thinning to reveal a clean horizon. The orchard stood silent, its twisted branches dripping with water, the earth dark and rich beneath. Ethan stood there for a long moment, breathing deeply, letting the dawn wash over him. Shadow pressed against his leg, tail wagging faintly, as if to remind him that the fight was over. The manor loomed in the distance, its silhouette scarred but standing, a testament to endurance. Ethan walked toward it, each step deliberate, each breath steady. The ground squelched beneath his boots, but the weight on his shoulders felt lighter. Not gone, never gone, but lighter. Inside, the house bore the scars of the night's violence. Shattered glass was scattered across the floors, doors hung broken from their hinges, and the scent of gunpowder lingered. Ethan moved through it slowly, assessing and remembering. He had defended it, as he had defended comrades in war, and though battered, the house remained his. He placed the bundle of documents back on the desk in the study. He lit a fresh lamp, its warm glow pushing back the shadows, and sat heavily in the chair. Shadow lay at his feet, curling into rest. Ethan unrolled the parchment map again, his eyes tracing the tunnels, the hidden chambers, the marks his uncle had left. He realized that every line and passage had been built with purpose, not only to hide but to test. The letter from his uncle lay nearby, for the one who endures. Ethan reread it, and the words carried a new weight. Endurance was not passive, it was active, a choice made repeatedly in the face of adversity. His uncle had trusted him because he knew Ethan understood this truth. The morning light grew stronger, spilling through the broken shutters. Ethan rose, gathering hammer and nails, wood and tools. He set to work repairing what had been broken. Each board he placed, each shard he cleared, was an act of defiance, of reclamation. The house would stand. It had endured storms before, and it would endure again. Neighbors came by later that day, curious and concerned. Some whispered of gunfire in the night, others of shadows moving through the orchard. Mrs. Whitmore arrived with her steady eyes and her basket of bread. She said little, only placing her hand on Ethan's arm with a look of quiet pride. Ethan nodded in return, no words needed. She understood. Marcus did not return that day, nor the next. His absence was a silence sharper than his laughter. But Ethan knew he lingered out there, plotting, scheming, waiting. Greed did not die easily. Donovan remained a shadow on the horizon, his smooth words echoing still. Ethan had enemies yet, but he no longer feared them. At dusk, Ethan sat on the porch with Shadow at his side. The sky blazed with the colors of sunset, the orchard glowing in gold and crimson. The air was cool and fresh, the storm's memory fading into calm. Ethan rested his hand on the dog's back, his gaze steady on the horizon. He thought of the battlefield, the nights filled with fire and smoke, of comrades lost and voices silenced. He thought of Marcus's mockery, Clara's pity, the laughter that had once threatened to break him. And he thought of his uncle, stern and secretive, leaving him not riches but a trial, a legacy of endurance. Ethan breathed deeply, his chest rising with strength. He had endured, he had fought, and now he would rebuild. The documents would remain hidden, guarded as carefully as the tunnels themselves. He would not wield them for greed, nor destroy them in fear. He would hold them silently, a guardian of truth, a soldier of secrets. Shadow barked once, sharp and clear, as if sealing the vow. Ethan smiled faintly, scratching behind his ears. Together, they had survived the storm. Together, they would face whatever came next. Night fell quietly, stars emerging one by one in the clear sky. The manor stood dark against the heavens, scarred but proud. Ethan lay down to rest, Shadow curled close, and sleep came without nightmares for the first time in years. The ghosts of war were still there, but their voices were softer now, drowned out by the steady rhythm of loyalty and the promise of tomorrow. The legacy had been fought for, guarded, and claimed, not by Marcus, Donovan, or any who sought to twist it, but by Ethan, the one who endured. And in that endurance, he found not only survival but renewal. The dawn would rise again, and with it, Ethan would rise too, no longer haunted by the laughter of others, no longer broken by the weight of silence, but stronger, steadier, and ready for the battles ahead. The manor was his, the orchard was his, the secrets were his, and the life that followed, scarred yet unbroken, was his to live. Victory had come not in riches or glory, but in endurance. And with Shadow at his side, Ethan Ward would endure for as long as the house stood, as long as the roots of the orchard reached into the earth, as long as the dawn returned to light the sky.